Every man carries a fight inside him he hopes the world never sees. Rikers Island, 1992. A corrupt guard runs an illegal fight ring deep in the prison basement. He bets $500 that no inmate can last 10 seconds against the most dangerous man in the facility. One by one, they line up. One by one, they drop. The guard laughs every time. Then a quiet lifer steps forward. A man nobody has ever seen throw a punch. His name is Solomon Reed, former bare-knuckle boxer from the hills of Appalachia. He doesn't just survive 10 seconds. He survives 30. And the punch he lands on second 31 echoes through every cell block on the island. The guard loses his money. Tyson loses his mystique. But what does Solomon gain that is more dangerous than any reputation behind those walls? If the story hooks you, like and subscribe. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Before that punch. Before Solomon Reed became the name whispered in every cell block on Rikers Island. See, the basement fights had been running for almost a year before Tyson ever arrived. Sergeant Ray Maddox started them small. 2 inmates. A cleared-out storage room beneath C block. A single hanging bulb. No cameras. No witnesses worth trusting. Maddox would take bets from guards on the night shift. $5 here. $10 there. Enough to fill his pockets but not enough to draw attention. Now here's the thing. Maddox was not stupid. He was careful. He rotated which guards knew about the fights. He made sure the inmates involved had disciplinary records long enough that nobody would believe them if they talked. And he kept the violence just controlled enough that no one ended up in the infirmary with injuries that couldn't be explained away. But then Mike Tyson walked into Rikers. June 1992. The most feared heavyweight on the planet. Convicted. Sentenced. And angrier than anyone had ever seen him. Believe me when I tell you this. The day Tyson arrived, the entire facility changed. Guards walked different. Inmates talked quieter. Even the air felt heavier. Not because people were afraid of him exactly, but because everyone knew that a man like that, locked in a cage, was a lit match sitting on top of gasoline. Maddox saw something else. He saw money. Within 2 weeks, he approached Tyson. Not directly. Maddox was too smart for that. He sent a trustee named Dwight. Dwight was a small-time hustler doing 3 years for fraud. Harmless. Easy to talk to. The kind of man who could deliver a message without making it feel like a threat. The message was simple. Fight in the basement. Win every time. And Maddox would make sure Tyson got certain privileges. Better food. Extra phone time. A cell to himself. Tyson didn't say yes right away. But he didn't say no either. And in prison, that silence is the same as a handshake. The first fight happened on a Thursday night. Tyson against a man named Curtis Webb. Curtis was 6'4", 240 pounds, serving 15 years for armed robbery. He had beaten 3 men unconscious in the yard over the past year. He lasted exactly 4 seconds. After that, Maddox raised the stakes. He started bringing in fighters from other blocks. Men with reputations. Men who thought they had a chance. None of them did. Now get this. Maddox began charging admission. 5 cigarettes to watch. A full pack if you wanted a front row spot. The fights moved from that storage room to a larger space. An old laundry facility that hadn't been used in years. Maddox brought in a second bulb. He cleared out the old machines. He even laid down a rough circle on the concrete floor with white tape. He was building an arena, and every fight ended the same way. Tyson hit somebody. That somebody went down. Maddox collected his money. The crowd went back to their cells. And the whole thing started over the next week. But here is what Maddox didn't account for. Solomon Reed. Solomon had been at Rikers for 11 years. Quiet. Kept to himself. Worked in the prison library. Never got written up. Never raised his voice. The kind of man that guards forgot existed. The kind of inmate other inmates ignored. He was invisible. And in a place like Rikers, invisible either means you are weak, or you are something else entirely. It was a Friday, late, the kind of night where the air in the basement felt like it had weight. Maddox stood on an overturned crate in the middle of the old laundry room. About 40 inmates packed in around the tape circle. Cigarette smoke drifting up toward the ceiling. 2 bare bulbs swinging slightly from the draft. Maddox held up $500 bills. Fanned them out like a poker hand. He made the same announcement he had made every week for the past 2 months. $500. Cash. To any man who can stay on his feet for 10 seconds. Now here's the thing. 10 seconds does not sound like a long time. Say it out loud. Count it in your head. But 10 seconds in a concrete room with Mike Tyson standing across from you is not 10 seconds. It is a lifetime. Every man who had stepped into that circle found that out the hard way. Most of them didn't make it to 5. Tyson stood in the circle. Hands down. Jaw tight. He didn't warm up. He didn't bounce. He just stood there and waited. That was the worst part. The stillness. Like a man who already knew the ending. Maddox looked around the room. Nobody? Come on now. 500. Tax-free. He laughed at his own joke. A few guards chuckled behind him. The inmates stayed quiet. That is when Solomon Reed raised his hand. Not dramatically. Not with any kind of show. He simply lifted his right hand about chest height. Like a man answering a question in church. Maddox looked at him. Then looked again. He didn't recognize him at first. 11 years in the same facility and Maddox had to squint to place him. Library man? Maddox said. You serious? Solomon didn't answer. He just stepped forward through the crowd. Men parted for him. Not out of fear. Out of confusion. Nobody understood what they were seeing. Believe me, the room went dead silent. Even Tyson tilted his head slightly. The way a dog does when it hears a sound it cannot identify. Solomon stepped into the circle. He was 53 years old. 5'10", maybe 180 pounds. He had gray at his temples and deep lines around his eyes. He did not look like a fighter. He looked like somebody's uncle. Maddox leaned toward one of his guards. This is going to be fast, he whispered. He was already counting Solomon out. Already spending the money he wouldn't have to pay. Maddox blew a whistle. The room held its breath. Tyson moved first. The straight right. Fast. The kind of punch that had put professional fighters on the canvas. Solomon shifted his weight. Just barely. The punch grazed his left shoulder instead of hitting his jaw. The crowd gasped. Tyson reset. Threw a left hook. Solomon moved again. Not fast. Not flashy. Just enough. 5 seconds. Tyson came forward harder now. A combination. Right. Left. Right. Solomon blocked the first 2. The third caught him on the ribs. He grunted. Stumbled back a half step. But he didn't fall. 10 seconds. Maddox stopped smiling. The whistle should have already blown. The fight should have been over. But Solomon was still standing. Hurt. Breathing hard. But standing. 15 seconds. 20. 25. The crowd started counting out loud. The sound bounced off the concrete walls. Solomon kept his hands up. Kept moving. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to last. And he was doing it. 30 seconds. And then it happened. Tyson dropped his left hand for just a fraction of a second. A reset. A breath. And Solomon threw the only punch he had thrown all night. A right hand that came from somewhere low. Somewhere old. Connected clean on the side of Tyson's jaw. The sound it made was like a door slamming shut in an empty hallway. Tyson's head snapped to the side. He didn't go down. But he stopped. And for one full second, the most dangerous man on the planet just stood there. Blinking. The room erupted. 40 men screaming. Guards stumbling backward. Maddox dropped the money. And then, silence. Tyson straightened up. He looked at Solomon. Not with anger. Not with rage. With something else. Something quieter. He nodded. Once. Then he turned and walked out of the circle without saying a word. Maddox picked up the bills, handed them to Solomon. His hand was shaking. Solomon took the money, folded it neatly, and walked back through the crowd. Nobody touched him. Nobody said a word. That night, for the first time in months, the basement was quiet. No more fights. No more bets. Maddox turned off the lights, locked the door, and went upstairs. And for one night, Rikers Island felt almost peaceful, like the storm had finally passed. But the storm had not passed. It had just changed direction. By Monday morning, every inmate on Rikers knew Solomon Reed's name. And that was a problem. Not for Solomon. For Maddox. See, the fight ring worked because it was invisible. 40 men in a basement. Controlled. Contained. Maddox chose who fought. Maddox chose who watched. Maddox chose who talked and who stayed silent. That was the system. And the system only worked as long as nobody outside that basement cared enough to ask questions. Solomon changed that. His name was moving through the facility like a current. Men who had never been to the basement were talking about the fight. How a 53-year-old librarian had stood in front of Mike Tyson and not only survived but landed a clean shot. The story grew with every retelling. By Tuesday, some versions had Solomon knocking Tyson down. By Wednesday, some had him knocking Tyson out cold. None of it was true, but that did not matter. What mattered was that people were talking. And when people talk in prison, eventually somebody with a badge and a clipboard starts listening. Now here's where it turns. Maddox called a meeting with his 3 most trusted guards. Thursday night, break room on the 2nd floor. He sat at the table with a cup of coffee that he never drank and laid it out plain. Reed is a problem, he said. If this story gets to the warden, we're done. All of us. Not suspended. Not transferred. Done. Federal charges. Inmate exploitation. Racketeering. We go from wearing the badge to wearing the jumpsuit. One of the guards, a man named Terrell, he suggested the simplest solution. Transfer Solomon to another facility. Make up a disciplinary reason. Forge the paperwork. Ship him out before anyone could trace the story back to the basement. Maddox shook his head. That makes it worse. You move him and people ask why. Right now he's just a name in a story. You put him on a bus and he becomes proof. So Maddox made a different decision. A worse one. He decided that the way to kill the story was to destroy the man at the center of it. Not physically. Not yet. But systematically. Strip Solomon's privileges. Pull him from the library. Move him to a cell block where he had no allies. Write him up for infractions he didn't commit. Stack enough paper on his file that anything he said about the basement would look like the ravings of a problem inmate. It started the next day. Solomon showed up to the library for his shift and found the door locked. A guard he didn't recognize told him his assignment had been changed. Sanitation duty. Basement level. The same basement where the fights had been held. Maddox wanted him to know. He wanted Solomon to understand that the walls were closing in. But Maddox made one mistake. A big one. He didn't account for Tyson. Because while Maddox was busy building a case against Solomon, something unexpected was happening on C Block. Tyson had started asking about him. Quietly. Through Dwight, the same trustee who had brokered the original fight deal. Tyson wanted to know who Solomon Reed really was. Where he came from. Why he could fight like that. And Dwight, being Dwight, told him everything he knew. Which wasn't much. But it was enough. Enough for Tyson to do something that nobody on Rikers Island had ever seen him do before. He asked to meet with Solomon. Face to face. Not in the basement. Not in a ring. In the yard. Like men. And when 2 men like that sit down together in a place like Rikers, believe me, everybody notices. Especially the man who has the most to lose. It was a Saturday. Yard time. 2 o'clock. The sun was high and the concrete was hot and about 300 men were spread across the open space. Some playing basketball. Some walking the perimeter. Some just standing in groups with their hands in their pockets. Solomon was sitting alone on a metal bench near the east wall. He had been sitting there for about 10 minutes when Tyson walked up. No entourage. No Dwight. Just him. He sat down on the other end of the bench. Didn't look at Solomon right away. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and stared at the ground for a long moment. Then he spoke. "Where'd you learn to move like that?" Solomon didn't answer immediately. He looked at Tyson the way you look at a man when you're trying to decide if the question is real. Then he said, "Harlan County, Kentucky. My father ran fights behind the coal shed every Saturday night. I was in my first one when I was 14. Tyson nodded slowly. "Bare knuckle. Nothing but. Why'd you stop?" Solomon turned and looked at him straight. "I killed a man. That's why I'm here. Now get this." The yard was loud. 300 men making noise. But the space around that bench was silent. Every inmate within 30 feet had stopped what they were doing. They weren't staring. They were listening. Tyson sat with that answer for a moment. Then he said something that changed everything. He said, "Maddox is coming for you. You know that." Solomon said, "I know. He moved you to sanitation, pulled your library job. He's writing you up for things you didn't do. Next step is solitary. After that, a transfer. After that, you disappear." Solomon said nothing. Tyson leaned back on the bench. "I'm not going to let that happen." And that was it. That was the moment. Not the punch. Not the fight in the basement. This, right here. 2 men on a bench in the yard. One of them the most famous fighter in the world. The other a man nobody had ever heard of. And the famous one just told the quiet one that he had his back. Maddox found out within the hour. One of his guards saw them sitting together. Reported it immediately. And Maddox understood exactly what it meant. Solomon alone was manageable. Solomon with Tyson's protection was something else entirely. You couldn't touch a man that Tyson was watching. Not without starting something that would blow the whole operation wide open. So Maddox did the only thing a desperate man does. He went down to the yard himself. During the last 15 minutes of outdoor time, he walked straight up to Solomon. Not Tyson. Solomon. He wanted to send a message. "Read," he said, loud enough for the men nearby to hear. "You've got a disciplinary hearing Monday morning. 3 write-ups in 1 week. That's a record even for this place." Solomon stood up slowly. He looked at Maddox. And for the first time in 11 years, he spoke to a guard with something other than compliance in his voice. "Those write-ups are fake and you know it. And I think the warden would be very interested to know what's been happening in the old laundry room on Friday nights." Maddox's face went white. Not red. White. The blood left his cheeks like somebody pulled a plug. Behind Solomon, Tyson stood up from the bench. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He just stood there, arms crossed, eyes locked on Maddox. Maddox looked at Solomon, then at Tyson, then back at Solomon. He opened his mouth, closed it, turned around, and walked away. He didn't look back. And every man in that yard saw it happen. A guard, walking away from an inmate. That image burned itself into the memory of every person who witnessed it. Because in prison, power is not a title. Power is who blinks first. And Maddox blinked. Now if you've stayed with this story this long, I appreciate that. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Because the stories on this channel only get better from here. But let me finish this one. Because the ending matters. Maddox didn't come back to the yard that weekend. He didn't come back to the basement either. By Monday morning, he had filed a transfer request for himself. Not for Solomon. For himself. He cited personal reasons. Family obligations. Nobody questioned it. In a place like Rikers, guards come and go. Most of the administration didn't even know his name well enough to care. But here is the part that matters. The transfer didn't save him. See, what Maddox didn't know was that Dwight, the trustee, had been talking. Not to inmates, to a corrections officer named Pamela Vance. Vance was new, transferred in from a facility upstate. She was clean, straight, the kind of officer who actually read the handbook and followed it. Dwight told her about the fights, about the money, about the Friday nights in the old laundry room. He told her everything. Vance reported it, quietly, through the proper channels. Internal Affairs opened an investigation within the week. By the end of the month, Maddox was arrested at his apartment in Queens. 2 of his 3 trusted guards were arrested the same day. Terrell, the one who had suggested transferring Solomon, turned state's witness. He gave up every detail. Dates, names, dollar amounts, all of it. Maddox was convicted of racketeering, inmate exploitation, and corruption of office. He received 8 years in federal prison. There is a certain kind of justice in that. A man who ran a prison fight ring ending up on the other side of the bars. I'm told he served his time quietly, kept to himself, didn't make trouble, almost like he learned something from watching Solomon read. As for Tyson, he finished his sentence, got out, returned to boxing. You know that story. The world knows that story. But there's a piece of it that the world doesn't know. On the day Tyson was released from Rikers, he stopped by the library. Solomon had been reassigned back to his old post after Maddox left. Tyson walked in, stood in the doorway for a moment. Solomon looked up from a stack of books he was cataloging. Tyson said, "You're the only man who ever hit me, and I thanked God for it." Solomon said, "Why?" "Because you reminded me I wasn't as far gone as I thought." They shook hands. Tyson walked out. They never spoke again. Solomon Reed served 4 more years. He was released in 1996. He went back to Harlan County, moved into a small house at the end of a dirt road near the same coal shed where his father used to run fights. He never fought again. He never talked about Rikers. When people in town asked him what prison was like, he gave the same answer every time. "Quiet," he'd say. "Mostly quiet." Now I started the story with a line. Every man carries a fight inside him he hopes the world never sees. I believe that. I believe Solomon carried that fight for decades. In the hills of Kentucky, in the basement of Rikers, on that bench in the yard. He didn't want anyone to see it. But when the moment came, he didn't hide from it either. And that is the difference between a man who fights because he has to and a man who fights because he chooses to. Solomon chose. Once. And it was enough. That's the story. That's how a quiet man with gray at his temples walked into a concrete circle, stood in front of the most dangerous fighter alive, and walked out with something no amount of money could buy. Respect. The real kind. The kind that doesn't make noise. The kind that lasts.